All right, guys, this is the end of Chapter 24, and this deals mostly with trade unions. So real quick, right, we've already talked about this. Owners during this time period made a lot of money while the average worker did not, right? They did not have specialized skills anymore. They weren't masters or apprentices or all that sort of stuff. And so as it says right here, now factory hands employed by corporations depersonalized, right? And the idea was that they were a commodity, like we talked about in class the other day. Now, the idea was, okay, that during this time period, there were going to be more jobs created, right? And people flooded into the cities to work in these. Also, people immigrated over to work for these jobs as well. But as one person, you were sort of, not able to fight against these giant corporations, okay? Corporations had a lot of ways to sort of combat disgruntled employees. They could fire them, they could lock them out. If they struck, they could use, as it says right here, high-priced lawyers to sort of engage in unscrupulous things to get Congress and the government to pass injunctions to strike down against the strikes, and also buy up local press and or put them on blacklists so that people wouldn't hire them. They could also hire strike breakers or scabs, and even use thugs, as it says, to fight labor organizers. And this kind of recaps kind of some of the stuff I just talked about. Children working in factories, right? Child labor, as we pointed out before. Men, you could pay women less than men, and you could pay children less than women. Also, small hands were useful in certain instances. The blacklist, like I mentioned. What's going to happen is the middle class, people that utilized a lot of these things, kind of grew sick of people striking, right? It seemed un-American, right? And big business might combine into trust to raise prices, but workers could not, as it says right there, combine into union to raise wages. And so the middle class really was, as it says right here, grew deaf to the ideas of the workers. Now, with the advent of the Civil War, labor is going to be in demand because of all the people in the war and dying and stuff like that. So this gave them an opportunity to actually begin to create unions. All right, a lot of times unions, as it says right here, were created around certain trades. So bricklayers, typesetters, shoemakers, and it really got going because of the Civil War. Now, the first one we have here is the National Labor Union. The National Labor Union is going to take everybody, okay? Lasted 6 years. It was one of the first national-scale unions, and you could be skilled or unskilled, mostly farmers, but you couldn't be Chinese or black to take part. Now, they're going to create their own sort of colored National Labor Union, but the problem is the support for the Republicans and the racism of the white members of the National Labor Union really won't allow it to combine. Now, they're going to call for the 8-hour workday, which we'll eventually see. As it says right here, it's going to be crippled by depressions in 1870. The Knights of Labor are going to come on board. The Knights of Labor are going to be successful for a pretty decent period of time. They also were going to be skilled and unskilled workers, whites and blacks, men and women. Okay, so they were very much egalitarian and taking everyone. As it says, it started as a secret society. The problem you start to see here, the people they didn't take were the non-producers. So if you did not actually create something physical, they saw you sort of as a middleman in the scheme. So liquor dealers, gamblers, lawyers, bankers, stockbrokers were not allowed to join the Knights of Labor. They campaigned for social reform, all right? Yet again, the 8-hour workday was a big thing. What you're going to see is that they grow in popularity, right? They win the 8-hour workday by having a number of strikes. They also win a successful strike versus the Wabash Railroad, which makes them grow in size, right? They were led by the Irishman Terence Powderly. But it's going to fall apart in Chicago on May 4th, 1886. So around May Day, 1st of May, they had organized several strikes around the city. Chicago being the big city that it was, had several people from other places, several immigrants that believed in anarchy, right? And anarchy and a violent overthrow of the government. And so while these people participated in these strikes, there was a bombing. So it says right here, sudden bomb thrown, killing and injuring several people. And this is called the Haymarket Massacre, sometimes is what it's referred to as. And what happened is people began to associate the Knights of Labor with the anarchists. And so, yet again, they associated it with foreign influence, they associated it with socialism, and it became unpopular. Now, eventually, right, the guys that were in the Haymarket thing were pardoned, but yet again, this was unpopular at the time period. As I said, they thought that the Knights were associated with anarchists, right? And they became unpopular. Another fatal handicap for the Knights was the inclusion of skilled and unskilled workers. And unskilled workers, as we said, could be easily replaced. Now, probably the most successful group during this time period is going to be the American Federation of Labor, led by Samuel Gompers. Gompers was a Jewish cigar maker, right? And the American Federation of Labor is going to be different than the other ones, right? It was a labor union of skilled workers, one. Two, as it says right here, no individual laborer could join it. You had to actually be part of your own union. So like whatever your trade was. So say cigar makers, you had to be part of the cigar makers union. And then the cigar makers union could then apply to be part of the American Federation of Labor. Gompers was, as said right here, very down to earth. He called for sweeping social reform. Was anti-socialism, and was not interested in politics, but more economic and sort of social goals. He had no quarrel with capitalism, right? He said he just wanted unionism, pure and simple. And one of his big things he's going to call for is a closed shop. A closed shop is the idea that everyone that participates in that business has to become part of the union. Now, this is one of those things that Carnegie and Frick are going to be like vehemently against, and what helps lead to the Homestead strike, which we've already talked about with the Pinkertons and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, here's the closed shop like we were just talking about. And the main weapon of the AFL was a walkout or a boycott, effectively like a strike, and then getting other people not to purchase those goods. The AFL, as I said, was one of the more popular ones. It was solid, right? But it fell short of representing all workers, composed of skilled craftsmen, and unskilled laborers were not part of it. Neither were women or blacks. Sometimes it's referred to as a trust for labor. We'll have talked about trusts today in class, but basically monopolies of labor, if you will. What's going to happen, all right, is through the late 1800s and early 1900s, more and more labor unions are going to come on board, okay? As we said in the initial phase, people were going to grow deaf to them. And it says right here, strikers lost about half the strikes and won the remainder, okay? The big thing is there's this change in attitude towards labor, okay? People began to realize that these workers needed more rights and that we needed laws to help govern these things. People, as it says right here, began to realize that it was okay for them to collectively bargain and strike. And so industrialists or capitalists or CEOs or whatever you want to call them began to actually just deal with the unions so that they didn't have to deal with the strikes. And as it says right here, vast majority of employers continue to fight against organized labor. The state of Texas today is still not really a labor-friendly state. So up north, you tend to have more labor stuff. Down south, it tends to be a right-to-work state, as we call it. As it says right here, if an age of big business had dawned, age of big labor, still some distance over the horizon. So what we're looking at really is the beginning of labor, and eventually the strength of unions will grow. But big business is clearly going to have the upper hand during this time period.